During a rough period of time because he worked for a despicable general officer that made him do some things that were not right and cost lives. But anyway, Colonel Miller did well. So we are also pleased to have Bob also serve on the Java Executive Council and are grateful to he and his family for sponsoring the Java Colonel Virgil R. Miller Scholarship. Without further ado, Bob Vokac.
Well, thank you very much, sir. I appreciate that. Now, I don't want to frighten anybody. Typically, when I like to talk with folks, I like to wander around. But since I wrote a script, I'm not going to do that. So hopefully I'm not going to scare anyone tonight walking around the room with a microphone, where you're going to have to follow me to and fro. So I will retreat to my designated station here. And you will see my technological skills in full display. So if it takes a minute or two to get the slides up, please don't panic, because they will come up. So give me just a minute. And that is, oh, by the way, V as in Victor. Okay, let's see. So that wasn't too bad, was it? So Minister I, distinguished guests, members and friends of the Japanese American Veterans Association, good evening. I would like to also recognize my cousin, Randy Miller, who has traveled from Los Angeles to be here this evening. Randy is the son of William Miller, Colonel Miller's oldest son. It is an unbelievable pleasure and honor for me to be here this evening as we continue to recognize yesterday's Day of Affirmation. I'm humbled to participate in this important event. Yesterday, I had the privilege of participating in a wreath-laying ceremony at the National World War II Memorial, along with two incredible women, Sandra Tanamachi and Missy Higgins Abrunzo. Is that close? Thank you. The simple act of participating in the ceremony was a powerful, emotional moment. Thinking about it now still overwhelms me. I was asked by Mr. Yamada to speak of memories from his grandfather, Colonel Virgil R. Miller, of commanding the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. I will tell you that, first of all, I should have brought my glasses because the script is a lot easier to see. But I'll continue. I will tell you now that this is the first time that I have spoken publicly of my grandfather, and that I can think of no more fitting venue than where I stand right now. Years ago, I learned an important adage applicable to all public speakers. Be brief, be good, and be gone. Now I can promise to be brief and to be gone, and can only hope to be good. Allow me to temper your expectations. I was 12 years old and the oldest grandchild when Grandpa died in 1968. So my conversations with him were that of a child, not as an adult. My grandpa was a career soldier, graduating from the United States Military Academy in 1924 and retiring in 1954. 3 years, or 10% of his career, was spent with the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, and it goes without saying that those 3 years were the most meaningful years of his life. How could they not be? He served with what he considered to be the finest soldiers in the United States Army. When visiting my grandparents, it was obvious that my grandpa was still on Army time. Though long since retired, for example, at 5 a.m., I would hear the coffee percolating in the kitchen and smell the cigarettes. Old military habits die hard. While many of us retired from the military have a, quote, I love me wall, shelf, or bookcase, there were very few overt displays of military service in my grandparents' home. If one looked hard enough, there were a few trinkets procured at various assignments. If there was, quote, a command post in the home, it was located in the basement where my grandfather had a small wood shop containing, among other things, scrapbooks. If you knew where to look, scrapbooks full of photos, letters, newspaper clippings, orders, and such told the story of the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. By pushing the right buttons, and of course all grandchildren are adept at pushing the right buttons for their grandparents, my grandfather could be convinced to open up the scrapbooks and provide a short history lesson. I wish I had listened better and paid more attention. What I do remember is my grandfather stressing what an honor it was to serve with such Americans. My grandpa was humble and certainly didn't tell, quote, war stories to his grandchildren. I remember when I pressed him hard to come speak to my 4th grade class about the war, he ultimately replied to my mom, quote, what could I possibly say that would be of interest to 4th graders? Well, Grandpa, there are so many things that you could have said. We all have stories. Every soldier has a story that explains the path leading to military service. For my grandfather, the story looks simple on paper. He worked for Colonel Pence at Fort McClellan, Alabama, and when Colonel Pence became the first commander of the regiment, he brought my grandpa over as his executive officer. Well, the story is more involved and begins with my Aunt Betsy. On March 3rd, 1934, and you see the telegram here on the slide, then First Lieutenant Miller and his wife Ann welcomed healthy twin girls, Betsy and Julia, my mother, into this world at Fort Warren, Wyoming. A telegram was sent announcing the happy news. Unfortunately, before her 3rd birthday, Betsy became sick with what would ultimately become a terminal illness. In 1936, then Captain Miller received orders for duty in the Philippines with a departure date on or about February 2nd, 1937, from San Francisco. However, because of his daughter's medical condition, he requested relief from his orders. The Army agreed, and Captain Miller was posted to the 30th Infantry Regiment at the Presidio of San Francisco. In 1939, my Aunt Betsy passed away and was buried at the Presidio. In fairly short order, my grandpa received new orders to Hawaii. Tough life. Sometimes fate leads us on unexpected paths. How so in this case? Quite simply, had Grandpa been posted to the Philippines as originally planned, there is every chance that he would have been present when the Philippines were invaded in December 1941. As such, there would have been no Lieutenant Colonel Miller in 1943 en route to Camp Shelby, Mississippi. It took the loss of a precious daughter to keep Grandpa on his path leading to the 442. The bonds formed between and among soldiers, particularly those who serve together in combat, are enduring, lifelong bonds. There are many sitting in the audience now who know exactly of what I speak. This story is about PFC Francis Sakai, Headquarters Company, 442nd Regimental Combat Team. And initially, Lieutenant Colonel Miller's orderly and driver. PFC Sakai was not a young man when he joined the 442. When he arrived at Camp Shelby, he was already 32 years old, having been born in 1910 in Hawaii, outside of Honolulu. Not too long after his arrival, as previously mentioned, he became the driver and orderly for Lieutenant Colonel Miller, then the regimental XO. Being a driver is a thankless task. In combat, a driver is exposed to the same danger as the officer, but receives none of the glory. However, by all accounts, and as told by Grandpa, a special relationship existed between the two men. PFC Sakai worked with my grandfather, and from 1943 until he, PFC Sakai, rotated home from Italy in September 1945. Shown on the screen is a note from the Oshkosh Northwestern of November the 12th, 1943. It says, quote, PFC Francis Sakai of Honolulu is spending part of his furlough with Dr. and Mrs. Paul G. Miller, end quote. Dr. and Mrs. Paul G. Miller were Grandpa's parents, and they were hosting their son's driver and orderly who had made the long journey from Camp Shelby, Mississippi to Wisconsin. Enlightening, to say the least. PFC Sakai wrote the following letter to my grandparents on May 11th, 1945, obviously in response to a letter received from them. To say that PFC Sakai was proud of now Colonel Miller is an understatement. Here is what PFC Sakai said regarding Grandpa's promotion to Colonel, and I'll read just a part of his letter. Sir, I waited for that day. Sir, in me, I was so glad and so happy that I couldn't say much to congratulate, rather didn't know what to say that moment. But sir, of all things, we live to tell the story, and certainly we hit the victory. Of course, sir, what Colonel planned goes into history. Sir, as far as I know, Colonel is brave man. So I took lots of interest in Colonel. Even in this almighty push, many nights we didn't sleep. But sir, we made it. When PFC Sakai left Italy in 1945, Colonel Miller wrote him a letter. While much of the letter is what we in the military is called boilerplate, I am particularly struck by the last paragraph where Grandpa writes, and I quote, I wish to thank you for a job well done, and with you success in whatever may be in store for you upon your return to Hawaii, and should you ever have occasion to visit the mainland, do not hesitate to call on me. I will advise you of my address as soon as the family is permanently settled. You know, that's pretty powerful from a colonel to a PFC. Unfortunately, after the war, the two lost touch at some point. However, during the 1961 442 Veterans Reunion held in Hawaii, where else, Grandpa was overjoyed to again establish contact with Francis Sakai. My grandma wrote, and I have to tell you here that my grandfather was referred to as Gil by many of his adult friends, which is a shortened version of Virgil. So the name Gil, you'll hear now. So my grandmother writes, Another delightful part of our trip was finding Sakai, Gil's driver, who had been with him for 3 years during the war. In some unaccountable way, we had lost touch with him, in spite of the fact that he had written us many times, and all the family had written him. Gil put, quote, scouts out, and finally we located him. It was a joyful reunion, for Sakai had been like one of our own family. His complete devotion to Gil is heartening to see, and he still addresses him as Colonel Sir. Francis died in 1964, having just turned 54 years old. I and my entire family owe PFC Sakai a debt of gratitude. He selflessly and tirelessly served with my grandfather for 3 years and kept him safe during months of combat operations in 1944 and 45. It is my sincere desire to make contact with Francis's family and to thank them for everything, once again, that he did for my grandfather. My grandfather loved the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, and because he loved the regiment, he could speak openly and honestly with the men. On May 6, 1945, a memorial service in honor of fallen comrades was held near Genoa, Italy. My grandfather spoke the following words, quote, "The sacrifice made by our comrades was great. We must not fail them in the fight that continues, in the fight that will be with us even when peace comes. Your task will be the harder and more arduous one, for it will extend over a longer period of time." End quote. I am proud of the inclusive language used in the few words just mentioned. Our comrades, we must not fail them. The fight that will be with us. While it was clear that the burden would be carried by the soldiers of the regiment as they transitioned back to civilian life, it was also clear that their commander would continue to fight with and for them. As one example, in 1945, a veterans of foreign wars post in Spokane, Washington, denied membership to Richard Naito, a story that many in this room are familiar with. Grandpa wrote to the VFW, and I quote, "When supposedly reputable organizations such as yours violate the principles and ideals for which we fight, these young Japanese Americans are not the only ones to wonder about war aims. Millions in Europe and Asia, too, will learn of your action and will question the sincerity of American policy and ideals." End quote. In a December 1945 Christmas letter to the regiment, Grandpa wrote, and I'll hit you just one part here, "Nisi soldiers in every theater of war have won the nation's admiration and respect by their courage and integrity on the field of battle. The coming year will be a challenge to America's Nisi citizens to display the same courage and integrity in the difficult tasks of peace, no matter what walk of life they may be in. It must be your job and job of every American citizen to prove to the world that the principles of Christ, the principles on which democracy is based, are as valid today as they were 2,000 years ago. The road will be hard, but if each of you can be as fine a citizen as you have been soldiers, the things for which you fought and for which many of your comrades have died are not beyond your reach." On February 1st, 1946, the regiment turned 3 years old. In a 442 newsletter published that same day, Colonel Miller addressed the regiment. He wrote, "I am proud of what you soldiers have accomplished toward gaining the respect of your fellow Americans and erasing that air of suspicion that centered about you during the early stages of the war. You have set forth an enviable record in the annals of the United States Army and thereby command the respect of your fellow men. And I think most powerfully the last sentence, again I say, I'm grateful to be one of you. On June 10th, 1946, just a few days before the 442nd departed Italy, my grandpa wrote a farewell message. The last paragraph bears repeating. I consider having served with you an honor and privilege. No commander could ask for greater troops. I consider you my soldiers wherever you may be. Your past achievements constantly cause me to look toward your future work and successes. Consider me one of you at any time and in any place. May God bless each and every one of you. I can only imagine the emotions that Grandpa felt when this picture was taken on June 22nd, 1946, shortly before the regiment departed Leghorn, Italy for the mainland. He was proud of his men and obviously pleased that they were headed home. However, for him, it was a painful separation. What he loved was soon to be lost. Colonel Miller did not return to the mainland with the regiment, nor did he participate in the parade and ceremonies of July 15th, 1946, truly the first day of Affirmation. That perhaps is the story for another time. Grandpa served 8 more years, retiring in 1954. However, he never forgot the men of the 442nd and maintained regular contact with many of the veterans. My grandparents visited Hawaii in 1961, as previously mentioned, for a 442nd Veterans Reunion, and again in 1966. From their 1966 trip report, obviously another bad Army habit that didn't die, once again my grandmother wrote, and I quote, "Shortly before Christmas, Gil began talking up a trip to get some sunshine and escape the Michigan winter. We considered many places, but from the start, Gil held out for Hawaii. So early in January, we set forth. We were not many hours on the way before Anne, my grandmother, realized that the purpose of the trip was not the search for sunshine, but rather the opportunity offered for visit with the boys of the 442nd and the 100th Battalion, with whom Gil had served for 3 years in World War II, and for whom he has always had the highest regard." And finally, from that same trip report, the satisfaction expressed over the success of so many members of the regiment. And I quote, "It was wonderful to meet the boys as friends and to see how successful they have been in civilian life." The go for broke spirit for which they had fought the war continues on into civilian life. And again quoting, "Each within his means and talents is in the highest bracket within his field. Each has the welfare of his community at heart. It gives Gil intense satisfaction to have contributed, even in a small way, to their success story." Grandpa never returned to Hawaii. He died in 1968 and was buried at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. I should mention that then Senator Dan Inouye saw to it that the regimental colors were present. I can think of no better tribute. Thank you for your very kind attention, and I again thank everyone, particularly the Japanese American Veterans Association, for the opportunity to speak with you this evening. Thank you.
Gerald's going to present you with an award. Thank you very much for your comments.
Yes, sir.
Well, again, thank you for sharing your memories with you. We've all heard about Colonel Miller, but what you offered us is the personal touch, and that's very meaningful to us. In appreciation of your presentation, I'd like to, we would like to present to you this image of the Lost Battalion painting. This is a painting of the rescue of the Lost Battalion. So,
Thank you so
hope
very
you
much.
Thanks again, Bob. To continue with the program, it's now I'm not sure what it is because, there's this junior kid that went to the same high school I did. He might have graduated before me though, because, I'm not a quick learner, but some 30 years apart. So that individual is retired Lieutenant Colonel Mark Nakagawa. He serves on the Java Executive Council and the Awards Committee. In 2021, Mark was awarded both Java's Veterans Advocate Award and the Java Service Pin. And he didn't sit on the pin. So without further ado, Mark Nakagawa.
It's always an honor and privilege to be able to follow a great senpai, a great mentor like Wade Ishimoto. And like Wade said, we did graduate from the same high school in the same century, but a couple decades earlier. So Wade, mahalo for the kind introduction. I'm honored to also serve on the Java Executive Council with so many of you in this room today. And on behalf of Mr. Terashima and Marty Herbert, who's not here, I have the honor and privilege to be presenting a couple awards. This evening we are presenting 2 Courage, Honor, and Patriotism Award. The award is Java's highest award, and it was started in 2005. This award honors a person or organization which has in either the public or private sector demonstrated superior courage, honor, patriotism, as exemplified by the Niseis who served in the 100th, or like we say in Hawaii, the 1 Puka Puka Battalion, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, the Military Intelligence Service, or the U.S. Army Air Corps as gunners during World War II, or also performed outstanding work to the benefit of the nation, including the Japanese Americans over a sustained period of time. At this time, I'd like to ask Ms. Sandra Tanamachi to join me up here to present the award. And Ms. Tanamachi was the first recipient of the award in 2005 and was honored for her successful struggle to remove a racial slur from 3 Texas street signs. She is also the niece of Mr. Saburo Tanamachi, the first Nisei soldier to be buried at Arlington Cemetery. The first Honor, Courage, and Patriotism Award is posthumously awarded to Colonel Virgil R. Miller. That Colonel Miller loved his men of the 100th and 442 is beyond question. Bob kind of explained that during his last 10 minutes here, which is just awesome. He describes his time as the most satisfactory and rewarding time of my 30 years in service. While serving as a regimental executive officer, then Lieutenant Colonel Miller was offered a promotion and a new command. He declined it to stay with the 442nd. As a military officer, that's a pretty big thing to do, to decline command and promotion to stay with his soldiers. So that tells you the love and respect that he had for his men. More importantly, even though he was an officer and they were his soldiers, they recognized each other as equals in humanity. After the war, he continued to be a fierce advocate for Nisei soldiers returning home, publicizing their wartime heroism and sacrifices, and openly defending their rights as Americans. Accepting the award is his grandson, Lieutenant Colonel Bob Vokac, U.S. Army retired, and Mr. Randy Miller. Please join us. As Sandra presents the award, I'll read the citation. For exemplary leadership commanding the 442nd Regimental Combat Team during the Maritime Alps Operation, Po Valley Campaign, and Italian occupation. Colonel Miller's leadership won battles, saved lives, and inspired all those who served under his command both during the war and afterwards when they returned home. Before Sandra, why don't you stand next to them and take a picture?
Oh, all right.
Okay, at this time,
Congratulations.
Randy, if you want to say a few words on behalf of the family.
Thank you. My grandfather truly did revere his time with the 442. I had the pleasure and honor of meeting some of those members in Honolulu in '69 and Los Angeles in 1970 at the reunion, and I totally understand it. They were tremendous individuals, and I'm so glad that I got to meet them and understand what my father and my grandfather knew. Thank you.
As a side note, this is not in the script, but I just want to say that this is how small the world is. When Gerald first said, hey, I've got a recommendation for another officer to be part of our Japanese-American Association, he brought up the name Bob Vokac. I'm going, hey, that name sounds familiar. Where did I hear that name before? So I met Bob yesterday at the World War II Memorial, and I go, hey, okay, he's an artilleryman. Okay, so we started talking. I said, yeah, we shared the same grounds together. Yeah, I was in Korea 3 times, 3 years. He goes, so was I. When were you at? Or where were you stationed at? I said, I was at Devardi, 2ID. I said, so was I. He was the Deputy Division Artillery Commander under then Colonel Lynn Hartzell, and I was working at S3 as one of the staff officers. So that tells you how small this world is. And fast forward just a few years, now, that was the last century, but now we fast forward a few centuries and look at that, we're both serving on the board of Java. And Randy, he's from California, so I said, first thing I said, hey Randy, nice to meet you. You're from LA, huh? Okay, good. Important question. Are you a Bruin or a Trojan? He answered right. He's a Trojan. Fight on, baby. All right, so it just show you how small the world is, even though we are all over the world. In the military, it's the brotherhood of service. It's the soldiers being soldiers. All right, getting back to the script. Apologies for that tangent there. Martha, sorry. The second Honor, Courage, and Patriotism Award is posthumously presented to Captain Marty Higgins. On September 24th, 1944, Higgins assumed command of Company A, the 141st Infantry Regiment. During Operation Dogface, the 7th Army's offensive line into the Vosges Mountain of France, the 1st Battalion was cut off behind enemy lines. Elected acting battalion commander by his fellow company commanders, Higgins directed the historic stand of what is now known as the Battle of the Lost Battalion, until the 100th and 442nd Regimental Combat Team, while sustaining heavy casualties, managed to fight its way through and relieve the beleaguered unit. This battle generated close ties between the men of the 35th Infantry Division, the Texas Division, and the Niseis of the 100th Infantry Battalion, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. Higgins continued his support of the Niseis and worked closely with Mike Masaoka of the JACL in securing passage of the Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1952, which allowed the Niseis to apply for citizenships. The Iseis, the parents of the Niseis that fought the battles. Accepting this award on his behalf is his daughter, Miss Mary Pat Higgins, or Brunzo. All right, I got it. I practiced saying that too. The award for Captain Higgins Reed, please stand there. For Captain Higgins' outstanding service to the nation as commander of the trapped soldiers of the 100th and 41st Infantry Regiment of the 36th Texas Division, and his steadfast friendship and support of the 442nd Regimental Combat Team after the war, testifying before Congress in support of the Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1952, which secured citizenship for Nisei parents.
Thank you.
On behalf of Java, we present you with this award.
Thank you very much.
If you want to say a few words,
Oh,
please.
not,
podium is yours.
not prepared. I'm not going to do it. I just, first of all, when I realized he was getting an award, I said, "What? You saved him. Why is he getting an award?" And then I read the fine print, and it was the Naturalization Act, or is that what it was? The Immigration Act of 1952 that he was active in. I was fortunate enough to know several of the people in the photographs at the JICC yesterday. I have known Susito, Lawton Sakai, and Terry Shima. I've been lucky to go to many reunions with my dad. One that he spoke at Punch Bowl Cemetery in Hawaii, where he was on the dais with Senator Daniel Inouye, who was very critical of the losses the 442 had endured to save the Texans. And I think my dad was pretty nervous, and I was behind him on the dais, kind of patting his shoulders, wiping dandruff off, both things. Anyway, after he gave his speech, Senator Inouye stood up and with his good hand shook his hand and said, "Good job, Marty." And I think the guilt my dad had felt for so long was kind of lifted. I mean, it was really a gift. It was wonderful. I thank you very, very much, and I'm really honored to have this. I hadn't prepared a speech, I just thought I'd tell you.
Thank you so much. Wade, I turn the podium back to you, sir.
Okay. Congratulations to our honorees. Yeah. It was especially heartwarming to have the two significant people, Colonel Miller and Captain Higgins, and their descendants represented here tonight. Oftentimes, in particular, we forget about your dad, Captain Higgins. And so it was a great pleasure to especially have you here tonight, but also the Miller family. Yeah. So another round of applause for them, please. And I thank very much Mark Nakagawa and Sandra Tanamachi for making the presentation of the awards. Now, I just noticed that my smartwatch is either not so smart or I'm dumb because it ran out of battery. But I guess that means we're kind of approaching the end of this wonderful evening. We still have time. I see the bar has closed, though, but we still have time to chat. But as we conclude our programming for what is, in fact, the inaugural day of Affirmation dinner, both yesterday at the National World War II Memorial and this evening's dinner we would like to acknowledge the hard work of not President Gerald Yamada, but to Nancy Yamada for putting up with his obstinance for all these years. But thank you, Gerald, for your vision, Nancy, for your perseverance, and also to our wonderful executive director that I pushed so hard to get her designated as the executive director, Anita or Neat Ford. Neat. A big thank you to the staff of the National Museum of the U.S. Army. This, in fact, was, in my mind, a wonderful meal. I've had 2 dinners here before, and this was superb tonight. So I thank the staff. I don't see them around, but if you can hear me, mahalo nui loa, as they say in Hawaii. And last but not least, thank you for the ladies for making the wonderful centerpieces that we have on the tables. And also thanks to Martha Watanabe for all the hard work she did to coordinate this event. And also for Howard High and Stan Fuji, our photographer this evening, for helping out. Does anybody have anything that they'd like to say or any announcements that they'd like to make? Gerald Yamada. Watch out, he's a lawyer.
Well, first of all, thank you for joining us tonight. It's been an enjoyable evening, and I hope you've enjoyed the program. I want to make one last pitch for the photo exhibit at the Japan Information and Culture Center. It's located at 1150 18th Street. The exhibit will continue until July 22nd. It's sponsored by Java in cooperation with the JICC. Minister I is the one that I approached in co-sponsorship, and I thought I'd have to sell it to him, but he immediately thought it was a great idea. And I think if you haven't seen it, I encourage you to take the time to go see it. It's photographs by Wayne Sato, professional photographer in Los Angeles. He's been taking photos of World War II Nisei soldiers for the past 20 years. And so he's published 2 beautiful books with their photographs, and what you see at the JICC is a small collection of those photographs. But with each photograph, there's a profile of the soldier talking about their history. So again, take the time, if you can, before July 22nd to visit the photo exhibit. And again, thank you for being with us tonight.
Okay, I just have 2 announcements. On your way out, if you need to use the restroom, as you proceed towards the glass double doors, you'll see both men's and women's restroom on the right. Okay.
Wait, make sure they take your cups.
What?
Make sure they take their cups.
Oh, yeah, make sure you take your cups. Okay. Now, the other announcement is, as you get to those double doors and you turn left towards the elevators, the first corridor coming back this way has an interesting display of some of the Nisei soldiers. And there's a travel bag there that accounts for all his travels during World War II. So you might want to take a quick look on your way out. All right? Bottom line, I've had a great evening. It's been an honor to serve as your MC. Hopefully I didn't offend anybody, especially Mark Nakagawa. Okay? And Carol, because otherwise Carol would kick me, yeah. But the last thing I ask of you, if you desire, is to join me in song and to sing God Bless America. Okay? So, on three. 1, 2, 3. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home. That concludes our program.